I can't remember if I forgot, is that I'd reached out to Dan Gorodnick at City, and I wanted to see, and maybe we could do this in the fall, to have one of the folks from city planning come in and maybe give us a little thing on what they're trying to accomplish, and I don't know.
I think
what he's thinking about on that score. Hey, Rebecca.
Absolutely.
So I know we're recording, and I don't like to do this even though I keep wearing the same shirt. I do have other shirts. I swear I have other shirts.
No one believes you, Ed.
I know. So I wore a t-shirt last night.
Literally do not believe you anymore. That's the sole shirt you have. Every Zoom thing.
We go into person. When we go back to person, I swear I'm going to start wearing a different outfit. So I'm like trying to eat a little dinner. So it's like, I don't like to disappear, but I don't want to eat on camera for posterity. So hey, there's Rita Popper. Everybody's here.
All right.
Assume everybody's got the air conditioning going in their apartment, home. Holy cow. All right. I'm here, but I'm just dashing away with my food for a second. Well,
no worries, Ed. No worries.
I could just slip behind the little thing here and try to scarf it all down.
Right.
And this is coffee, just in case anybody wondered.
No one said a word.
I know. Not that everybody's going, gee, he needs more caffeine.
Well, let's give it another couple minutes here, just to make sure folks have opportunity to jump on.
We had a pretty good meeting last night with the bylaws committee, I think.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, we got full board next week, right? On
the 2 weeks, the 20th. Yeah. Next week is land use.
Next week is. Right. Oh boy.
All right, let's give it one more minute, and then we'll start. Is that okay, co-chairs?
Good with me. I think that's fair. Did you all see that Jimmy Kahn passed away last night?
Yeah, I did see that.
Very sad. Fan. They were showing The Gambler. They were showing, yeah, I know, right? Who was that with that? Yeah, Boaz, I'm with you. They were showing The Gambler last month, I think, on cable. You never see that one from '74. Him and Lauren Hutton. That is such a great. That is good stuff. Good.
Yeah.
Like old New York, all around the city in the '70s. Very cool.
Yeah. All right, let's jump in. How about that? We ready? Good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Morris. I'm one of the co-chairs. Co-chairs, you want to introduce yourselves? And then I know Zach's got to do his thing. Go ahead.
Ed Hartzog, co-chair. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, Rebecca Lamort, co-chair.
Awesome. Zach, you want to give us the rundown?
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for the committee co-chairs and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much for teeing us up there, Zach. Great to see everybody tonight. The weather is warm. I hope where you are cool and relaxed. Co-chairs, you want to say hello to folks? Feel free, and we can kind of jump into the agenda.
Let's roll. We got a big agenda.
All right. All right, so I'm going to kind of start us off here because we have an agenda with three parts to it. Part number one is just spending some time on a recent report from the Manhattan Institute. And again, when reports come out or analysis comes out, we have tried to, during the course of our meetings, over the course of this time together, the last year and beyond, we've tried to have presenters come out and share information about what they're learning, what they're thinking when it comes to housing related issues in New York City. And we've had a pretty distinguished group of presenters, I think, over the course of the last year and beyond. In fact, we had Jessica Katz on, who now is a big shot down at City Hall, reporting to the mayor related to housing items. So, we've tried to be front and center here and try to really understand what it is that's happening in our city, specific to housing options. Of course, it's also true that our district needs statement, one of the top items is a desire to see more affordable housing in this district. So when this report from the Manhattan Institute came out from Eric Kober, the senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, the title of the report was How to Solve New York City's Housing Crisis, Building New Housing in Restricted High Opportunity Neighborhoods. So very specifically in this case, whether you agree, disagree, or anywhere in between, the Manhattan Institute's analysts sort of focusing on very specific neighborhoods in New York City where there hasn't been a trend of new housing being built. And that certainly is true, as we've talked about in this community, in this committee meetings on the Upper East Side. And so what the report does is share a little bit in terms of these 6 neighborhoods where housing hasn't been found, hasn't been developed over time, sort of flag some things that the analyst sort of reflects on and thinks about, and about what he's seen and where he thinks the reasons why, and then also make some recommendations as to what he thinks might change that. Now, Eric couldn't join us for this meeting. He's interested in coming in the fall if we want him to come in the fall to talk to us. But his report got some traction in Bloomberg News. We know that this topic is hot down at City Hall right now. And the real focus being on where are the neighborhoods in New York City, like the Upper East Side, where if you look at the last 10 years, new housing hasn't appeared. And so this is sort of a report and analysis as to what it is that why is that, sort of from the perspective of the Manhattan Institute fellows. Again, agreeing, not disagreeing, just presenting the analysis. So that's one part of this conversation. Second part of this conversation that we thought we would have this evening would be about public housing. We have talked over the last year about, specifically in this district, when we talk about public housing, there's Robbins Plaza, there's Isaac's Houses and Holmes Towers. Oftentimes, Isaac's Houses and Holmes Towers become the focus of some of our conversation, where there's no less than 2,200 residents of public housing in this district. I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think there's public housing in this particular district, but there is. And we know by virtue of HUD report from many years ago, Isaac's Houses and Holmes Towers structurally are very troubled, need a lot of work. And as has been reported by virtue of some of the conversations we've had together, there's a lot of work that hasn't been done to be able to address some of the repairs that need to be done in that development. And this committee has talked about strategies to be able to try to hold the city accountable for getting the repair work done in these developments, because we think that will benefit our neighbors and the city needs to be held accountable for doing what it says it needs to be done. Now, again, when we talk about Nycha, that's a state-run entity, but the reality is it's our city contacts are the ones that have to be held accountable to be able to execute on some of these gaps and flaws in terms of the repair work taking place or not taking place in that development. So I want us to talk about that as well, because that closes the loop some things we talked about before. And then, of course, the third piece would be to say, let's start getting ready for what we want to take on in the fall. And I have some of the notes that we put together at the beginning of this year and some of the progress we've made thus far. This is a lot of preamble, sorry. Let me just add one more thing, and then I'll defer to Ed and Rebecca before we talk about the Manhattan Institute report. But let me just add one more note, because I think it's an important one for all of us to think about. Zach, thank you for sharing that. Zachary, thank you for sharing the report. If you hadn't seen it, it's in there. And then Zachary, if it's okay, what I'll do is I'll share my screen. I actually have some of the quotes or some of the content from the report. I'll share with this body. We can talk about when I'm ready. But the other thing I want to just say is this, upon reflection, as I think about this committee, I think we have had robust and meaningful conversations during this time together. I think where the struggle is to take these good conversations and turn it into action items, because what we're up against, as Rita and others know who've been part of these conversations, the weight and authority that this committee has to be able to push forward with new housing development, addressing affordable housing issues, is extraordinarily challenging. And I think we need to, as I think chairs, we need to work as hard as we can to create opportunities for action, so we can go from really good conversation to action items. And I think it's been tough for us to figure out how to do that, I think. But I'm hoping that by virtue of our commitment to supporting our friends in public housing, our neighbors in public housing, and I think maybe learning from other community boards and other committees along the way, maybe perhaps partnering or engaging with zoning committee would be beneficial, but also to just try to take, I think, the things we've talked about here and try to turn them into actual action items is something that I think we need to double down on and strategize about. So I'm putting that on the table because of all the committees, every committee has a tough job. Everyone's got a long road to walk to be able to see action. I think addressing housing in our city and in our neighborhood, in our district, is particularly challenging. And we've had good conversations. I think we've learned a lot. I think there's a lot of desire, but the work of what it takes to actually initiate action items is an uphill climb. And I think I'd love to see this committee double down and trying to make some good things happen. So I'm sorry for that sort of preamble, but I wanted to just kind of get that out in the open. And I'll look to Ed and Rebecca if you guys want to add anything. I hope what I'm saying is in alignment with our conversations and other things we've talked about, but I'll defer to you two to at this point, and then when we're ready, we can switch to the Manhattan Institute report.
I'll defer to Rebecca, and then I'll add something that Anthony sent me right before our meeting. So if Rebecca has something, I'll please let you go.
I think right now we have a unique opportunity with the mayor still laying out his housing plans. As Greg said, ours is a community that hasn't seen much new housing development, and we have a lot of existing housing needs in public housing, private housing, affordable housing, and we haven't seen that addressed. And the mayor still hasn't laid out his roadmap. So as we get to item 3 for new business, and we look to the future about what we want to be looking to, what we want to be focusing on, the city is still in a nascent place in the new administration to inject some of the ideas, hopefully. So I'm looking forward to that conversation and seeing what the group wants to work on moving forward while we're still in a really formative phase for city policy in a larger way right now.
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody's saying here, and I'll just make an observation that's interesting, and I caught up with it. I think I saw today or read today in Patch, or either on the Upper East Side, whatever the news outlet was, that they're starting construction on that location that we know about on 79th and First Avenue. That's now going to be a very large health facility. And my only observation about that is not to say anything about the health facility, but just to say that I think we all remember a meeting we had, it was a few years ago, what was it, 300 people, I think, at like Chapin. And I think Gary Barnett was there talking about that very site. And I think at the time, he wasn't sure what they were going to do. I just am sorry to see that that site is not building housing. And for whatever reasons, they've decided, I'm not here to second guess their business decisions. It's just sorry that, again, not again saying anything bad about healthcare, but just saying that, housing would have been nice on that site. So it's kind of what is the point I was trying to make. And I just wanted to share something really quick because Anthony Cohn, who was a member of our committee, couldn't be here, and he just wanted to had a couple of comments I wanted to throw out there, and I think they echo a lot of the things that we've been talking about, and those were on Greg and I were talking about. We will tonight about zoning. His point was, as I'll read here, is that he's talking about the zoning. Why is it all right to preserve, quote, the suburban portions of Riverdale and propose more high-rise in CD8? Why do we see the 61 zoning as restrictive? It allows massive developments. Why is the answer to more housing, more private development? I think the upshot, what Anthony is getting is kind of what we said before, Greg, and it all is, it's cohesive, right? It involves maybe a future with the zoning committee and talking about zoning and doing something to incentivize housing outside of what, look, let's face it, we all know this. I mean, the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, places just south of our district, these are high income, high return on investment locations. And, clearly, it doesn't take an MBA from Columbia to figure that out, or an expert in real estate, why that is. So maybe that's part of our discussion tonight. I'll stop and let us do our thing.
Yeah, and before we get to questions, I want to just kind of talk through the Manhattan Institute piece a little bit, and then we'll open the floor, if that's okay. Sorry to put you guys on pause for a second. But let me just add one note to this to say, I think I'm going to suggest on behalf of the co-chairs, if it's okay, and I think our co-chairs are in alignment on this, that the most desirable state is to try to create constructive conversation about what makes sense and what can create, the sort of change we envision. And again, I think during the course of our conversations, when we've had guest speakers come in, there have been times where, we've disagreed with presenters. There are times where presenters have put things forward that I think there was a lot of enthusiasm about, and sometimes not as much enthusiasm. I'm referencing this because if you saw the Manhattan Institute report, and this is, I think, is what Anthony is getting at, there's some content in that is a question mark. You might read it, hear it, and think it, and say, that makes perfect sense to me. And there might be other times you might think that and say, no, that doesn't add up. And in fact, this report starts by saying, part of the problem in the city right now, and the reason we don't have as much housing availability as we should, is because there are some neighborhoods that are resistant to housing opportunities and housing development. And he picks on 6 communities, including the Upper East Side, where there is this sort of framing to say, hey, these communities are ones. And again, I'm sharing the content, okay? Because I think there's some value in this, to say, hey, what are you doing to be able to open these opportunities up? And I think the argument has been made during the course of some of our committee meetings that this community has tried. It opened its doors and tried to welcome developers who made commitments to do things that they then haven't done. That's part of an angle. There's also this idea of, and we've heard this during the course of our meetings too, we've heard some people say, yes, I'd like to see development in this neighborhood. We've heard some people during the course of these conversations say, I don't think that's the right idea either, right? So again, I think it's good for us to have content that we reflect on, because ultimately there's no easy answer. And I just think us being more informed and our body being as informed as it can be as to what people are thinking is valuable. Again, I think this Manhattan Institute is important though right now, because it is highly likely, because this mayor is talking about increasing housing options and is targeting, as far as we know, neighborhoods that are not typically the ones that have been chosen to see more housing development, as sort of being in the sort of target zone of a place where there should be development. So it's important for us, I think, to be aware both what the pros of that are, what the cons of that are, what the logic of that is, and how it is that we think about it in support or in opposition, or a combination of both, depending on what the circumstance is. So on that note, without getting too much in the weeds of what is a 30-page report, of which 20 pages is focused on other neighborhoods, which I'm not going to spend time on tonight. What I'd like to do, Zachary, if I can share my screen, I'm just going to pull out some of the content, some of the bullets that are shared, just to put us all on the same page. Because if you didn't get a chance to see the report or read the report, I pulled out 10 or 12 items from it, just so that you're aware of what was being shared and what was being thought about. There's some sense of why this is important, a little bit of the history, and some of the strategy, okay? And without getting too much in the weeds on it. And then we'll open up the floor to questions and reactions. Ed, Rebecca, is that okay? Can we do it that way? Okay, thumbs up, I see. Zach, you wanna, if I can share my screen? Awesome, thanks so much, man.
Yeah.
If I can share it, hold on a second. Well, maybe I can't. Maybe I can't, hold on. Sorry guys, give me 1 second.
I'll fill the time by noting that I see the
Thank
top
you.
floor at 432 Park Avenue is back on the market. Those of us who are in the bidding, I know everyone here will be bidding for that $169 million penthouse. 169. Oh,
Crazy.
wow. On the 96th floor. Someone said to me, how do they get the water up there?
You're able to share, or?
Zach, I'm having a little bit of an issue. Is it okay if I share my doc with you? Would you be willing to, could you post it for me or no?
Yeah, send it over and I'll share it.
Thank you. I apologize, everybody. I can see as I opened up my screen, I was having a little bit of a block there, and I don't want to fight my computer to figure it out in the moment. So let me just go share this with you, Zach.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. Ed, if you want to fill time for another minute, feel free, Rebecca. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, like I said, it was just perusing the views from, I'm only going to get those views from the newspaper. Nice digs if you can get it. Wow.
Here we go. Sorry, guys, having a little bit of a computer issue. Just give me 1 minute. Thank you for your patience. My apologies. Here we go.
Well, filling airtime, I'll say also sorry to see the passing of James Caan, which we talked about before, but now that we're live, make it for the recording. As they say, a true New Yorker, Jimmy Caan, born in the Bronx, raised in Queens.
Made the actual recording. Zachary, I just sent that to you. Let me know if you don't receive it for some reason. It's a PowerPoint doc. And if not, I'll just talk my way through it. Sorry about that.
I received it. Give me 1 moment. Let's see. Okay, hopefully this should be okay. Let me know if it's, or you want me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, and if you could just get us to slide 3, I'm just gonna, what we'll do is we'll go through slides, I think 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So these are some of the particular bullets from the actual report itself. And Zach, I don't know if you can see that. I'm seeing you tell your story via video. Can you take that off? Is that possible? Thank you. Sorry. There you go. So what I did here was it's always a good idea to tell your story via video. So what I want to do here is I just pulled out some specific bullets right directly from the text of this report. This is from the Manhattan Institute, Senior Fellow Eric Kolber. So a couple of things. This report, as noted, if you see, I'm just working from the highlights here. Between 2010 and 2020, in most of the city's high opportunity community districts, rents and sale prices rose, but the supply of housing did not. We've heard that before. We've talked about that in this committee before. Something like over a 10-year period, only 200 and some odd new units developed, despite all the scaffolding and construction. And that's because things were merged, some things came down, things were added. We've talked about that during the course of this committee before. Next bullet here, our mayor, and Rebecca, thank you for noting this. There's a plan being developed, as the affordable housing plan has been put out to the public. There's more conversation happening now about what that actually means. but there has been a focus on this idea of inclusive citywide approach to encouraging housing. We don't necessarily know at this point what that will mean. But if you think about the last administration, which I think most would argue was very favorable to certain types of development, included a lot of rezoning options, those are things that might be on the table in this particular round. This report then goes on to say, and if you notice that in that second bullet, but he will likely face strong opposition from well-financed anti-development activists who will say that their neighborhoods have no room to grow. That's where you can learn a little bit about what the Manhattan Institute thinks, by the way. And then in the third bullet, whether you agree or disagree, and then item number 3, this report surveys of okay, 6 high opportunity community districts with less than 3% housing growth in 2020. So the report itself focused on the UES, the Upper East Side, this community board location, one of the 6 elements that are considered in this report. Zach, if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues here. So this is specific to now, what's keeping sort of housing development from happening, again, from the Manhattan Institute's analysis. Easy to understand that an extremely low FAR, FAR, low floor area ratio, discourages home construction. Some of these areas FARs are relatively high, but new construction is deterred by off-street parking requirements, et cetera. That's the first bullet. Second bullet, in other areas, new housing is prevented by a combination of height restrictions and a prohibition on ground floor residences. And then it notes the de Blasio administration problems of rezonings related to affordable housing, economically infeasible without special tax incentives that expire, which I believe is referencing 421A. The third bullet, even with tax incentives, meeting these requirements without public subsidy is possible only in the city's strongest housing market. Undoing these many restrictions is a complex and costly undertaking. So flagging here, why are we running into trouble? Well, if you can't build up, that might be a problem. If you're zoned not to be able to build, that might be a problem. If the tax incentive plans for housing developers, whether you agree or disagree, are not in place, then there's not going to be the build out. And of course, as was noted in the last slide, if folks are going to say, well, I don't want development here anyway, that could be another barrier to seeing more housing. Next slide, Zach. Next, there you go. There you go, right there. Beautiful. Okay. So Community District 8, that's us, comprises Upper East Side from 59 to 96. Its per capita income, 2014 to 2018, 113,000, 3.8, that of the median community district. Now, if you were part of this committee a long time ago, you might remember Jessica Katz, who now has a significant position at City Hall, talked about the income in this neighborhood versus closest neighborhood to it, East Harlem, for instance, and sort of flagged that. If you go back in the minutes, great report on that, probably a year ago, and her thinking about the gaps and disparities between income in one place versus income in another. And then there's a little bit of history. There's a little bit of a history lesson, again, from the perspective of Manhattan Institute, specific to the 1961 comprehensive rezoning. Prior to 61, high-rise and subsidized housing was concentrated along the north-south avenues and wide east-west streets west of Lex, including 72nd, so 90, 696. You can see that in the notes here. Much of the rest of the neighborhood was developed with old law tenements built at a rapid pace in the 19th century. Next bullet down there, the 1961 zoning mapped the city's highest density residential districts along north-south avenues and west-east wide streets. Lexington Avenue increased the permissible size of a tower, portion of a building that rises above 20 stories. Prior to 61, towers could cover only 25% of the building's lot. After 61, it was 40%. As a result, a forest of tall buildings emerged on the rezoned block front. In most of the city, the 61 zoning stymied new housing construction, but this neighborhood, the UES, remained. A series of restrictive zoning changes under Koch and Dinkins substantially reduced the area's development potential. So again, Manhattan Institute flagging, hey, there was some opportunity, when things came to light. Now we start to change around the zoning requirements, and now that ends up stifling development in some pockets of this particular neighborhood. Zachary, next slide, please. All right, so here's the flag that Manhattan Institute says. Again, agree, disagree, or somewhere in between. Blocks of tenements remain along the avenues. There's substantial development rights stranded, A city with a dire housing shortage needs to make choices. Either protecting the development, either protecting tenants or preventing zoning lot mergers can be a priority, but not both. Essentially, what the report is sort of saying is, hey, look, you've actually got buildings you might be able to take away and build new buildings. Of course, that has an impact on your tenants and how it is that you ensure that those tenants are taken care of. So that's a problem. But then if you want to make any zoning changes, that's a complex problem too. And that requires your city engagement and state engagement as well. So now you're stuck dealing with both these things at exactly the same time. Manhattan Institute's recommendation, the best way forward is for the city to repeal its tower on a base rules and let the owners of the remaining avenue fronting blocks and tenements use their development rights while demolishing the smallest feasible number of tenement buildings. Interpretation in this particular case, Manhattan Institute saying, give developers some freedom, make some adjustments and changes, and let them start building. Again, agree, disagree, or in between. That's what maybe our friends at City Hall and other places are hearing, and they may be seeking to respond to that. The report then goes on and takes another step and actually flags a couple of areas where housing there might actually be opportunity. Green District 8 also retains a few small enclaves in Upper Yorkville, near the East River, along East 73rd, East 74th, and just north of the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge, where new housing is prohibited. I believe the Queensboro has been renamed, where new housing is prohibited. While these areas have only a few possible housing sites, the prohibition no longer makes sense and the city should initiate rezoning. Once again, there may be some pockets and places where some rezoning can result in build out. And the report then goes on to flag some of those items in more detail. Again, this is not rocket science, not going in a deep dive into this. Eric Kober is not with us. If we have questions for him, we can lay them all out. He can join us in the fall. He can talk it through and he can explain. But virtue of the conversation with him sort of said, hey, there's history here. There's complexity here. There's zoning issues. There's height restriction issues. All of those different pieces put you in a place where, yeah, development's going to be particularly challenging. And that's not going to change unless one of those things or more than one of those things changes. And you are in a circumstance where if there are opportunities to build, those things can happen, but that obviously is going to have a direct impact on existing tenants in existing tenements. And then what happens to those individuals? How are they taken care of past that point? That's a lot to digest. I encourage you to take a look at the report. Again, not getting into the weeds too much here and not favoring one side or another, just flagging a report that may have an influence downtown and in other places where people are thinking about what housing development looks like. I'd love for us to get to questions and reactions. And I'm sorry that Eric is not with us, but if we have questions, he's more than enthusiastic about hearing those questions and responding to them at a later date. Before we turn to questions on the floor, Ed, Rebecca, reactions, thoughts, questions, good framework for this group to start with. Anything triggering for you guys before we get into comments from the committee?
Really have anything to add?
I mean, it was immediately triggering, for me to see give developers more free reign, because we know what happens if you don't put certain checks and balances on that free reign, but I know the Manhattan Institute is looking at it from one perspective. They're not looking at what the specific policy is. They're looking at the larger perspective, the larger environment that we're working within, where the policy has to meet the needs. But just that right away, it's give them free reign. And, it's sticker shock, but that's, I think, a big part of what we as a community and we as a city have to get past, that it's a give and a take, where it's incumbent on us as the community to say what we want, what we need, what's reflective of our goals here locally for affordable housing and our local needs, and see how that fits into the larger picture. So that's my immediate response.
Yeah, and to that point, and to build on that, I was a little struck when they're talking about the tenement. One thing, I mean, theoretically, you could knock down. I like to see the tenements because I think it's a bit of our history, and obviously not lock us in. But what we all find a lot of is a lot of these small businesses, these 6-story tenements along the avenues, along the side streets, they have a lot of small businesses in them. And I know we're coming back from the pandemic and small businesses, but you knock all these out. Where does the what is a small business that's part of that? You know what I mean? I mean, we could just build a ton of towers, but what happens to the neighborhood, right? I read somewhere years ago that in New York City, people actually, it's like they live in 5 square blocks. I think I know for us, you know, the first thing you're looking for is where's the grocery store, where's a good dry cleaner, right? The good shoe repair, the other, you know, and if we go that way, do we lose? I don't know the answer. And the question is, do we lose? You know, is that part of the sacrifice? I don't know. And maybe, like we were saying, maybe in the future, in the fall, for down the road on our agenda tonight, we talk about maybe having joint meetings with zoning and maybe small business to kind of hash through some of those larger complex questions. That's just my first thought.
I appreciate the feedback in both cases. I think those are good reflections, and I think it's honest. Those are both honest and reasonable reflections. The complexities of dealing with developers. The reality is people live in a certain square footage area where they think about their schools and their supermarkets, and that's where they want to be. And
right.
How do you change that? How does that evolve? How does that change over the course of time? If you change that and you just build up, what does that do to a neighborhood? By the way, and I said this to Eric during the call that I had with him, you know, the third rail in a lot of our conversations, by the way, is the idea of changing the FAR numbers, right? Like the idea of making any allowance to build up is problematic in and of itself. I think this community board has been beating that drum for a long period of time as well, right? That's a whole nother layer to this. So then what do? Do you just say, well, there's nothing that can be done, there's no place to look? We may end up in a circumstance where if a conversation is going to happen about rezoning, and other neighborhoods that have learned this over the course of time, you may end up in a circumstance where your ideal state doesn't end up the way you think it's going to, because the city is dictating to you as opposed to you being able to sort of express to the city what your desire is. The complexity of this moment in time, obviously, and we'll turn it over to questions after this. The complexity of this moment in time is that we have a housing crisis in the city, and we're never going to solve it if there are neighborhoods who say, we're not interested in helping to solve it. This is actually a circumstance where everyone's going to have to figure out how it is that every community contributes to solving the problem. So all that to say, we'll pause there. Again, putting this content on the floor for reflection, not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, just putting it on the floor to say, this is a report, people are digesting it and thinking about it, and it may have an influence on conversations that happen from here. I've done a lot of talking, so Ed, Rebecca, it's okay if I defer to you and you can take the question and answer section of this. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Thank you both.
All right. So far, I see one hand. We'll start with Boaz, if you want to unmute him. Thank you.
Okay. I will get to the Manhattan Institute report, but I just need to give you all a context. So last week, I've talked with over 100 people on the street as part of, there was election. I'm not going to talk about the election. I know the community board is not part of the New York State election, assembly election, but I had a chance to talk with over 100 people, seriously, in Upper East Side. The three main concerns of the people, the buckets, are the public safety, childcare, and housing. Regarding the housing, there are 4 groups. And again, I know that you guys don't like to put people in buckets, but I really can, I think from my observation, we can really put those, we can set up some kind of buckets. So there are people that are living in public housing, and their main concern regarding the public housing is about the maintenance or the lack of the maintenance of the public housing. The people that are living in regulated rent, their main concern is that the rent stabilization, the rent is getting increased, and there are a fear that they will be squeezed out of the rent controlled apartment. The people that own apartment or own co-op, their concern is actually development. They are anti-development. Most of them are anti-development. They don't want to see new building. They don't want to see new development. It is what it is. And the fourth bucket, that's where I am, is the market rate. People that are paying market rate, and their main concern is that this year there was an increase specifically if from the COVID time. During COVID, we had there was a COVID discount because a lot of people left the city, and there was jump of over in many people told me that they had a jump of 20, 30, or even 40% in rent, and many people are basically getting squeezed out of Manhattan or Upper East Side. The bottom line, each group has its own interest. Manhattan Institute, I read the entire article. They put the glasses of the market rate. They are saying, listen, let's build more housing. You increase the inventory, and eventually the market rate will go down. That's the problem now of the market rate. If when I searched for apartment last year, there were around 3,000 listing in Street Easy. That's the main website that everyone are using in Upper East Side. Now there is less than 700. Just to give you the context. And that's it. I mean, the demand is high. I can tell you that for I live in Knickerbocker Plaza. Lots of people in the market rate are leaving, but there is already waiting list for new people to come, and they are willing to pay the increase of the amount. The demand is high. The supply is low. I'm happy the demand is high. I'm a big believer in the Upper East Side. I'm happy that the city is bouncing back, but it is what it is. And regarding the message of the housing crisis, if you talk with people that own apartment or own a co-op, they don't care about it. And I get it. I will be honest with you. If I would own apartment, I wouldn't want to see the extra development because they don't say, listen, okay, it's going to impact the schools, hospital, and so on. There are more layers to it. So every group has its own interest. Public housing, they are mainly focused that they are going to stay in the public housing, and they are going to and they are complaining about the maintenance. Regulate rent are complaining about the increase of rent and being squeezed out of their apartment. And people that live in market rate, it's and by the way, people that live in market rate, they are not activists. They are not joining the community board because, there are lots of, they are living for, they are really hustling their way to pay the rent and to try, most of the New Yorkers and that you see on activists and in community board and so on, are people actually that are in the public housing or own apartments / co-op or in a regulated rent. So, I'm happy. I'm super happy that you guys mentioned the Manhattan Institute article, because this is actually from the view of the market rate, and it's rarely you guys are taking from this perspective. And if you're talking about from this perspective, the only solution is just to build, increase the inventory, and the rent will go down. That's what I have to say. But thank you very much for giving me the time. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Next we have a phone number. There's no name associated. So whoever is calling in from 347 and it ends in 485.
Did we lose them?
No, they're still here. 485, you can unmute. Can you just identify yourself, please?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
hi, please identify yourself before you share your comments with us.
I'm sorry I couldn't go to the computer today. It's damaged. My name is Marco Tamayo, member of the Community Board 8. Can I speak or I have to wait?
You can speak. Thank you, Marco. Just if you're unidentified, we got to ask for recording purposes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to refer to the whole document because that will be to encroach the policy of other community boards. I'm going to refer exactly what this gentleman wrote about Community Board 8. I learned from this gentleman that he represented real estate industry, and with his misconstrued concept about how our affordable housing will disappear from our community. In 1961, Our community was targeted to be mapped for the highest density for the real estate industry. The consequence is that we are the densest community board in the entire city and the country. Overdevelopment with super tall buildings and with a dramatical reduction of affordable housing in the city because our community was targeted for its solid real estate district. Ironically, bravo for the real estate industry. But local activists, I'm referring to the Ashby, the Slater, the Wallerstein, Civitas, the old one, not the present, the Friends of the Upper East Side, and the decision makers brought this wonderful concept to an end, and a series of changes were made. I believe this gentleman is referring to the creation of the contextual districts on the mid-blocks RAB, and the double and triple protection of the section of the historical district. Also, this gentleman is referring even more benefit for the real estate industry when the Second Avenue Southwest Q line was opened. This is a baseless argument because without any zoning changes, the Southwest Q line is already crowded. When this gentleman is referring to the costly payment to the tenant, he is referring to the buyout. I absolutely agree with him. But even under these excessive payments to these tenants, the real estate industry demolished affordable housing to build only luxury housing and high expensive schools, like at the Beverly School, forming even more the social disparity in our community. Mr. Cover mentioned a project located at 360 East 88th Street, which used the air rights from the adjacent property. And the building height reached 460 feet. For him, this was a success. Let's see if this is true. In contextual district, the maximum height is 19 stories or 210, whichever is less. This project is 460 feet tall with 200 feet in excess. Density, 52%. So 52% they use for housing, and the rest is, they don't use it. They use for big apartments to make more profit of the total of this development. This means most likely luxury housing and maybe some middle income housing and the affordable housing most likely will build in depressed areas, the old voucher programs. Or if those were built in the same project, we don't know how many of them were left in there. Consequently, great success for the real estate in removing residents of affordable housing to depressed areas and losing the scale in our neighborhoods. Therefore, the 210 height for the buildings make a lot of sense where we can negotiate the height of the buildings in perpetuity of affordable housing. Mr. Cover is claiming that the air rights was stopped. The zoning mergers never were removed from our community, from the zoning resolution. As a matter of fact, until today, it exists. A good example is Excel, 79th Street and First Avenue, transferred from the church 100,000 square feet of the air rights. On the contrary, the tower on the base created even more opportunities to build super tall buildings beyond 210 and create the Billionaire Road and or luxury housing. Another example, he said, 301 East 80th Street, which is very familiar for us. For us, 200,000 square feet with only 73 luxury housing, whose density is 25%. This makes even more profound social disparity and social resentment that no even billion of dollars will resolve it. His conclusions are even shocking. This gentleman aids this obscure action. He is referring to demolish the reminding of the affordable housing. It has been stopping the wonderful growth of luxury apartments in our districts because the city doesn't allow to demolish the existing affordable housing with super tall buildings out of scale, only for the billionaires.
Marco,
In short, our community is under attack to disappear affordable housing. Now you can say whatever you want. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have Sahar.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I wanted to apologize that I'm taking this on, while I'm on the road, but I wanted to really attend this and, hear this. It seems so important. So just wanted to say a few things related to it. That if, as the author was saying, that like if we have more developers coming in and, bringing in more, high rises, there's so many things that are affected by it, and we all live in this community, so we all know it firsthand. First of all, about parking, we all have it's so difficult to find parking in the Upper East Side. So if we have more apartments, we have more developments, how would we resolve that? There is such a huge issue with that. Number two, as I think some of you have already mentioned, about schooling. I have two kids who are, in school. Having more people come into the area, obviously, we would need more schools then in the area as well. So how do we resolve all those basic requirements that are needed if there are more high rises allowed in the area? And I love the point, I think, Ed, that you mentioned about businesses, that, we have to sustain. Yes, we all work together as a city, as one community. But then again, we have to also look after our Upper East Side community itself, and the businesses are our backbone. So if we are not taking care of them, and many of these are, these are businesses that have been owned over generations. These are small businesses. They are not like one of those that have branches all over the country, but these are usually ones that are owned by a family. And many of them are restaurants as well. What will happen to those as well? So there's so many factors to think of before we can get into this. The other point, I think, is the developers, when they're coming in, they come and try to develop or make a building that is a condominium, because that generates the, maximum resources for them. They can sell it there's always a high attached to each apartment. We all know all of that, right? Now that usually allows investors from overseas to come in and invest in those apartments. And with the condominium, the benefit that they receive is that it can be rented out forever. So the owner is never walking in. So the problem that we are trying to resolve is to provide more housing for people like us, right, who are living in this community, in the city. If there is a foreign investor who's just investing because this place, Manhattan, and especially the Upper East Side, is a very profitable venture over the years, it's like a capital gain. That person is never walking into this and living in this area, number one, may keep it vacant. So we are not resolving that issue because it's not out in the market for people to actually utilize it. Or if that person is renting it, then that person, that foreign investor, doesn't have any, how shall I say it, like if there is something wrong that's going on, or like any leverage or any direct interaction with the community. So we have to think of those. Either we put a cap, like it has to be a co-op building that can be constructed, first of all, because with the co-op, people have to live in the apartment that they buy. So that brings in ownership, that brings in a community coming together. You just don't have foreign investors coming and having vacant, apartments. Number two, we put in this whole clause that, okay, if you're developing, if we are being asked to do that, then you have to put in maybe one whole floor for parking, so that we can resolve those basic issues that we all are facing, all our community is facing on a daily basis, and struggling as is with it. We cannot add on to that struggle. So I just wanted to add those few points. So thank you so much for bringing this amazing and very important topic, on the floor. By the way, I'm one of the new board members, so it's so good to see all of you and, kind of interact as well. So thank you.
And thanks for making the effort, calling from the car. My goodness, I'm so glad you could be here.
Thank you.
For coming to the housing committee. Yeah. And
Yes.
Parking is something that we hear a lot about at numerous committees. You'll see in your time on the board now. So welcome. Thanks.
Now that
All right,
alternate
next-
side of the street is back.
Yes, I did that this morning. Next, we have Andrew Ravishir.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. And I just want to thank you for presenting this paper and letting others speak, because people have just brought up so many great points that I wholeheartedly agree with. My ideology really starts with following the money. And so I think it's important to note that the Manhattan Institute from 1997, which is when I was born, to 2017, took in over $3 million from the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers are libertarians and conservatives, and they hate regulation. And so it is no shock that their institute of choice is just coming up with the idea, if you build it, they will come, because it's not exactly the case. I just want to take you through one case, kind of a case example, which is that across the street from the new 72nd Street subway, on 72nd and 2nd, is a whole block of 5 stories, currently housing 28 apartments. And these apartments are rent stabilized apartments that are actually affordable, which is not the same as affordable housing, because affordable housing is a term of art. It means a very specific thing, and it's not really actually affordable for New York City's workers. So these are old tenement buildings. There's a church, 5 stories, 28 units. There's going to be a new development that's taking up the whole block, consisting of 2 projects. One is a 230-foot, 21-story tower. It's going to bring about 54 apartments. So that sounds great. That sounds like an increase of 26 apartments. None of them are affordable. The affordable housing that they're building, how cute, is 4 units in a separate tower. So if you're just looking at the raw units, again, 54 units plus 4 units is 58, minus 28 from the old 5 stories, and you're gaining 30. How wonderful. It's the free market at work. But it's not actually helping people, because we've lost 28 minus 4, we've lost 24 units of actual affordable housing. In addition, we've lost all those small businesses that currently take up the block. And for every dollar that's spent at a mom and pop shop, 67 cents of that stays within the community. So we've lost eyes on the street for safety. We've lost local economic dollars and also jobs. We've lost community. And we're seeing this just happen left and right. And my big fear is that it's really good that we protected tenants during the COVID pandemic. It's really important that we did. It means that the smaller landlords now are really strapped for cash. And that is a tremendous value for, frankly, not only real estate firms, but Wall Street firms that are right now all across the country buying up housing, sometimes entire communities left and right, for their own employees, for their own profit, for their own investment, but it exacerbates the shortage of housing that we actually have. And what these Wall Street or luxury real estate firms are going to do is offer a really sweet deal to these struggling, actually earnestly struggling mom and pop landlords. And they're going to buy out blocks at a time, and they're either going to build their luxury housing, or they're going to employ the strategy that the developer of the new Penn Station uses, which is let it rot, let it decay, let it go on for years, just like the corner on 78th and 1st, which has been vacant since at least 2008. Let it get really bad, and then the city is going to desperately come to you, sweeten the deal with incentives, and they're not going to provide that much oversight, and then they're going to build what they want. And so I'm pointing out all these problems. In addition, our mayor and our governor, God bless them, are absolutely bought out by real estate. Revenue loves them. And so I'm pointing out a bunch of problems with this theory of if they build it, they will come, the market will take care of itself, because there are immense regulations and rules that and actual oversight that need to be put in place. I think a great bet right now is, I'm 25 and I'm working from home, and a bunch of my fellow 25-year-olds really want to work from home. We don't want to go to an office. I think there's tremendous opportunity to rezone either hotels or office buildings into units that are actually affordable. Now, I know part of the challenge is that, for example, in Midtown, a lot of the towers, for example, have windows on the outside, but not so much on the inside. And that creates a challenge because I'm pretty sure all apartments are supposed to have windows. So what do you do with that internal space? There's tremendous opportunity to do good here, to preserve the limited amount of affordable housing or housing that is affordable that we actually have, and to not get caught up in the craziness that unlimited building is going to solve our problems. There are two prominent theories of Nimbyism and Yinbiaism. Nimbyism, I'm sure everyone knows what that is, but in case you don't, it's called not in my backyard. It's really against any kind of building or disruption or growth. And Yinbiaism is yes, I'm in my backyard. And these are people that just champion building no matter what. And both of these premises are really flawed. If you don't allow for any housing or any building, you atrophy and you wither away. But if you have Yinbiaism, if you have uncontrolled growth, you don't end up with excellence. You don't end up with a strong middle class. What you end up with is a tumor, and you end up with a proliferation of luxury housing. You have crowding at the local schools. You don't have enough grocery stores. Firefighters hate these tall buildings because they're fearful about what happens if there's a fire on these upper floors. And so here I am pointing out a bunch of problems with the paper that was presented. I don't have a ton of solutions, but I'm hopeful that if we put our minds together, we can create solutions. I know that in every crisis, there's great opportunity and new thinking that can come about. And so I'm so happy to be just as a member of the public attending this meeting, sharing thoughts. And thank you for listening to me. And I'm so happy to listen to others too.
Thank you. Next, we have Wendy Mckeever. And then after Wendy, if there are no more hands, Greg, I defer to you. Ed, I defer to you if we want to move on to our next topic or we want to keep going. Yeah. Okay, Wendy, the floor is yours. And then, okay, after Rita, you're our last speaker on this, and then we'll move on to item 2. Thank you. All right,
Hi, can y'all hear me?
The floor is yours. Yes, there we go.
Hi, thanks so much. You know, I think it's you. Everybody who spoke before, y'all are a real tough act to follow because I so agree with so much of what everybody has said. Well, as I was very impressed that you were out speaking to the public. I think safety was the first thing that people spoke about with me, and they definitely related it to the loss of businesses, COVID related, and then rent related. The towers that are going up, if you look on 2nd Avenue and 80th Street and 81st Street and various other places, 3rd Avenue, they do not have the same kind of robust mom and pop retail space that gave eyes on the street when my kids, you heard Andrew speaking, when he was just learning to walk on the street alone. There were safe haven signs in the various windows in Eric's Pizzeria and in Annalisa's Bakery and many places where both my kids could dart in if they felt in danger. So there's a tremendous effect that is not being addressed in terms of robust and nuanced zoning. The thing about the Manhattan Institute is, you know, it really is sort of a developer's paradise. And it's interesting to hear their point of view. It doesn't really come as a surprise. We have had in the past requirements for 20% of all of the units going to affordable housing. Again, that is a problematic definition because affordable is then based on some number of what they think the income is rather than looking at the people who are displaced and needy and what their income is. And I think that part of the solution is, and I've hoped for, a moratorium on the destruction of the 5-story tenements. There is actually a lot of building that could take place, a lot of employment of Local 79, which I believe in, by adding floors to the current mid-block zoning limits and even the avenue limits on top of those units without losing them. Many of you have heard me speak for so many years. I'm wondering how many years it is now, at least since 2018, maybe 2017 on environmental issues. But that block that was torn down by Extel between 79th and 80th on First, they were all 5-story tenements with the main floors were all businesses. And I know the layouts of what happened inside. They were 2 to 4 apartments per floor. And because they were affordable units, in the traditional sense of what real affordability is, people really couldn't afford to put on their air conditioners. And there was one air conditioner per unit. You could see it in the windows. And nobody could afford to run it all the time because that adds at least, $300 to $500 per month. That's a lot for many of us. And so they didn't. And what you do is you would find your neighbors in the supermarkets or in some other area. And you just point out that our closest cool down area we have is on 23rd Street, and we don't have those amenities. I think, you know, previous speakers have mentioned that we're not building schools, we're not building more fire community services that we need to support these large towers. In terms of parking, y'all have to know that it's a very conscious decision on the part of developers not to develop parking, because that requires a very robust and detailed and particular type of environmental impact statement. Those are incredibly expensive. They are probably over $1 million to produce. This is the reason that the Jacob Javits Center, a major convention center of New York City, does not have a parking facility. We must be one of the only ones in the nation that does not. What can I say? What we really need is a more nuanced and sensitive housing plan and zoning plan. It's not an either or. Developers don't have to be the enemy. If there are no rules and we are the Wild West, then they have a reasonable expectation that, heck, they own a property and they can do what they want with it. And if you have a robust and reasonable zoning platform, then Eichler's have also done with all of the variances, with variances being granted as an expectation, because I've called the Department of Building several times. We don't have a robust set of protective laws, and one of the roles of government is to protect people who are not the Koch brothers, the rich and famous, the powerful. I'm certainly not against building. I also think that there needs to be a more sensitive idea of building. I think I happen to live in an apartment building that has units that are leased to clients of United Cerebral Palsy. And so these are adults that are differently developmentally disabled. And we welcome them and we love them, and they're our neighbors. And they have certainly changed people's views as to how people can be incorporated into a neighborhood and are beloved. And I think that we have opportunities even now with what exists now in the larger buildings to have units that are affordable, that are discrete, that are not separate entrances and stigmatized. The mayor, as he was running, was seeding a plan to take all the people that are displaced by this runaway development and place them in such far outreaches of outer boroughs that there are no transportation hubs. How are those people going to find employment, travel around? What is their future like? We cannot round up all of the people that developers think are undesirable and stick them out in the hinterlands and hope that they go away. I was at that Chapin meeting years ago as well, and I remember the question posed to Gary, and he said, "What do you want? Housing that would house recent college grads?" Well, yeah, it's okay. I think the neighborhood should incorporate all the groups, the whole panoply and spectrum of our fabulous city. Ages, races, occupations. We need workers. We're dying because we don't have workers. All those glass fronted buildings that I used to think they were very attractive too. You've heard me speak environmentally. They're horrible for our environment. The taller buildings cause irreparable harm, and all those luxury occupants who aren't even here in the United States are not going to suffer, but we are going to suffer. Our workers, our neighbors, our residents of color are incredibly disproportionately affected by these climate change effects when we go taller. It doesn't mean that we can't go dense. It doesn't mean that we can't build robustly, but it means that we can't just reach for the sky in an unbridled fashion. That is a terrible argument and a terrible thing that we are doing to our residents, and to be addressed by
Wendy,
the
I'm
group that
sorry,
produced that report.
we just have a couple more items, so if you just want to start wrapping
Okay,
up.
I will wrap up. To have them talk about anti-development activists is simplistic, not nuanced, and does not actually address the real problems that all of the speakers here tonight have brought up. So I'm hoping that there will be some resolution of a more nuanced result. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy.
And last but not least, Rita Popper, the floor is yours.
I actually had my hand up, but it must have come down. We have beat this topic to death. And we're still at the same place where we were before. The only place where you can get affordable housing is in the outer boroughs, and not in all of them, but mostly East New York, Brooklyn, that AMIs are between 60 or 30 and 80% or 100%. East Harlem, 128% is the starting. We're pushing people who need affordable housing. We're pushing them out of the city, and we're pushing them into what before were really bad neighborhoods, but those neighborhoods will gentrify just as the Upper West Side did with Mitchell-Lama. This city's name is going to change to Extel. Papaya King on 3rd Avenue is now going to be Extel. Across the street, it's Extel. On 1st Avenue between 78th and between 79th and 80th, it's Extel. On 1st Avenue between 85th and 86th Street and coming around to 86th Street, Extel. And they're all very high-end apartments. I disagree with people who think that the mayor wants to help us. I'm very sorry to say it. There was an article, which I'll be happy to send to everyone, where he is going to be the mayor of yes. He's going to allow everybody to build and do what they want. But as Sahar pointed out, and things that we knew from what went on in Columbus Circle. In Columbus Circle, there was some kind of, not a study, but they found out that most of the people in that Columbus Circle were not Americans, and that only had that apartment as an investment, because you can't open up a bank account. So therefore, that's an investment. And Russian oligarchs who got stuck in Britain, they're not swimming in the Thames. But at any rate, I think we need let me back up. Anybody who built affordable housing in Mitchell-Lama or Section 8 made a lot of money. They were mostly rentals, some were co-ops. And the co-ops are still in because the co-ops are decided by the people who live there. And a lot of people who moved in, the Mitchell-Lama originally was supposed to be 50 years, but none of the developers would buy into that. So it came down to 20 to 25 years. It's federal money. We keep talking about the city. The city doesn't have money for this. The city never invested in affordable housing. It's the state and it's the federal government. What are we doing? Are we making an appointment with the head of HUD in Washington and saying, what can we do? And I will make an appointment for anybody who is not going to talk long with the people who still own my building, and I'm happy to say Bose and I live in the same building, my building is now market rate. And market rate, they get a 20 and 30% increase every year. So that's okay. They move out and somebody else moves in and they get that money. So we're shooting with rubber bullets, though I don't like to use that analogy because I have a thing about shooting, but they're killing us with rubber bullets. And that's That's what's happening. But we sit here month after month, year after year, and we're not off the dime. So what I'd like to suggest is that we find out from our Washington representatives who we should call at HUD and make an appointment to see them. I'm sure they like to travel. Maybe they'll come up. We'll find a place for a meeting and let's ask them. But before that, let's talk to my developer, because he agrees that they made a lot of money. Why do they hate it? Why did they hate Mitchell-Lama? They hated it because of the paperwork. And you know, the federal government loves paperwork, just loves it. The point is that if these people bought a pencil, they had to fill out 6 pages. So there is a place, there is a mid-road here. I went up to graduation, up to Pelham, and in the Bronx, there is so much room for building. There's so much room for building, even in Manhattan, as you go up. I think we need to go a different way than we have been going, because we're getting no place. I think that we have to start meeting with people who can make a difference and who could do something that we can then go forth. This mayor, like the mayor before, unfortunately, I had hopes. He just came out. He's going to be the mayor of yes. And he's saying yes to every developer. We know it's a business. He's a mayor for 4 years. If he doesn't get elected, he needs a job. You know, we're not stupid. We know what the deal is. The elected officials can't do what we want them to do. I think this has to come from the people, and then we ask the elected officials to go forth with it, but they're not coming up with the program. They've got enough going on. So I think that we have to take a different tact. I will arrange, if we do a pre-questions for, the man's name is Robert Vaccarello. If we do 10 pre-questions, because after that, you lose him. So if we could give 10 questions to him and say, these are the questions we want to discuss. We want to understand how Section 8 was so good for both the developer and the tenant. Now, the reason that everything is a condo is because the developer gets his money out right away. He doesn't have to worry, whatever. The people at Section 8 didn't have to pay their mortgage. They had an interest-free loan. They were given money to build.
While we're talking a lot about the federal government and HUD, this is kind of a nice natural segue. So Greg, Ed, if you're both good with this, I think we can start blurring into our second item, because it is federal focused and it continues the conversation where it's different than Section 8, Mitchell-Lama, like you're speaking of. It relates to that, Rita. So we have, this relates directly to it, because again, if we're talking about a conversation with HUD, the big thing, that I think of when I think of HUD is our public housing stock, quite honestly. So this is really a perfect segue. When you said HUD, I was like, public housing, all the bells started going off.
Actually, public housing is New York City. And
yes, but our federal power comes from them if we're going to be having conversations, So I think it all, because we know locally, we're never going to get the relief we need. We're a small piece, we're a small cog in the wheel with our city monies, our state monies, but we need that federal power punch.
Public housing was city money, and it's totally different from the Section 8, which was federal and state. Remember, Mitchell and Lama was state representatives, senators, or assemblymen. That's where they came from. That's how it became state, and the money came from the federal government. This public housing is city. Probably, and you're right, the federal government, I'm sure, put some money in, but predominantly we have all of Section 8 was state and federal. Let's see what they have to say.
I'll outline also our additional questions that we were talking about. So on our agenda, we have 3 specific questions that pivot back to our past meeting around housing issues, specifically as they relate to public housing, because we were talking about, Rita, kind of like you were saying, upping the ante, doing outreach to our local electeds, asking them for data, asking for specific feedback, things we need. So the 3 questions on our agenda for item 2, Greg, Ed, feel free to jump in at any time. Do we have an agreement on the specific data that we want to require for work to track for orders and repairs? Question 2, how will we know if the data received from Nycha is accurate? Accountability is really big. We know what it's like to go down the Nycha rabbit hole, how we're always kind of chasing our tail, and it's the larger we, not us here individually, the tenants more I'm speaking about is the we. And question 3, can we agree on action items that CB8 can take in support of tracking work and the orders for repairs? So this is a part of our ongoing, this is an old business item. Greg, Ed, feel free to jump in. Everyone share your thoughts. I don't want to take up too much of the floor.
I would just add that, yeah, I agree with you on the info, and it's unrelated, but on information, it's something I saw that the comptroller just came out with on the ferry service, right? In terms of information, getting correct numbers. There was I don't know whether they were cooking the books or whatever they want to say, but to your point, Rebecca, and everyone's point on that, without the good information, and I don't know if that, in terms of getting the good information, if that requires us to have somebody on the inside, or someone that we know who is an advocate or working at Nycha or in HVD, or somebody, can verify that we're getting good numbers. That would be nice.
Yeah, just to rewind, I think during the course of our conversation, I think it was May, and if you check the chat, Zachary put in the link to the minutes from the May meeting, as it relates specifically to Nycha. There were 3 or 4 points we made that we sort of started with, which was what is the current listing of outstanding repairs? What is the ongoing timeline for repairs? This is specific to work orders and tickets that have been put in. Those are kind of the 2 primary points. So, what are the outstanding issues categorized? What is being resolved? What is the timeline to resolution? The other question would be, what's preventing the resolution of those things? The desire, I think, from this committee's perspective, based on our conversations, would be to get the feedback on a monthly basis to know what Nycha is reporting. But a huge conversation during that May meeting was our dialogue with residents of public housing, in particular the Homes Isaacs Coalition and others, to be able to get clarity as to whether or not what is being reported back to us is actually accurate, at the same time as trying to get a sense of what analysis needs to be done to understand what the actual needs are in the development as it relates to work orders and work repairs. What I'd like to do is to push us to actually having a formal sort of request of Nycha to say, we as a committee, we as a community board want this data because we want to understand, because our neighbors are telling us these things are not being completed in a timely fashion. So we want to hold you accountable as a government body to be able to execute on these things. And we can't do that unless we have that data. And as was pointed out during our meeting, we can't do that unless we are working hand in hand with residents, in particular the Homes Isaacs Coalition. And we've got some of the folks, some of the leadership on the Zoom to say, is what Nycha is reporting actually accurate? So again, those are sort of the data points. And I think this is an opportunity, Rebecca, to sort of say, is there any data that we're missing? Is there anything that's unclear about that? Is there anything we want to amend about that? And if not, then I would expect us to be able to, as co-chairs of the committee, to put that content out quickly and with the expectation that we'll start getting fed that data as soon as Nycha is capable of reporting out. Sorry, Rebecca, to jump in on that, but I hope that's helpful.
No, totally fine. And Rita, if you're good with this, we'll go with Sandrea first. I see hands. Yeah. All right, Sandrea, the floor is yours.
Hi, greetings all. Sorry, I'm off camera. It's one of those days. When it comes to Nycha or any city entity in New York City and other entities in the city, you can't really trust numbers at all. And although we have a controller and although we have other types of oversight, you just still can't trust it. Information may have to be foiled. You also have to listen to the residents. If you're using homes and homes towers and Isaac houses to get our actual feedback. As a former city worker with NYPD, I know also numbers either or have been inaccurate or fudged, and that's just how it is. We also have attorneys take root justice when we filed our HPU action lawsuit, and I believe you all should network with them as well, because even when we go to court for our case, our HP action lawsuit, there's a lot of discrepancies, and Nycha is just not up to par with even when we're in court with the numbers and accuracy with repairs and what was done and just a follow up. So they either lag with things or they just don't report. And then there's also the problem with tickets being closed. So that's a problem, because if it's closed and a resident doesn't know to push back against it, reopen it and make some noise about it, it'll just be closed if it was repaired or something was done, and a lot of times it hasn't, or they wasn't home, and sometimes it's just a lot of fabrication. So I just wanted to put that on the record, and hopefully if you all want to do this, you have to work, include, like I said, our attorneys would take root justice, involve them, at least to get some more real concrete accuracy, because they have, our records, they know what's going on. And we also work with the compliance unit, which that could be another avenue where you can get some checks and balances with the compliance unit, more than going to Nycha to management, because they're just not trustworthy. That's it.
Thank you. We're taking notes also on all of this while this is happening. Next, we have Rita. The floor is yours.
When I went before the city council to save people's apartments of single people who were living in a one-bedroom apartment where HPD wanted them to move down to a studio, we won 3,500 people got to stay in their apartment. DHCR came and spoke for Nycha. And the one thing that was asked of DHCR are Nycha tenants, and I don't know the answer, maybe Sandrea does it. Are Nycha tenants required to move down when their family composition changes? In other words, Nycha has some very large apartments, and people moved in there and their children got married or whatever, but there's no incentive to move down because they're still paying the same amount of rent, because they're paying 30% of their adjusted rate income, whether they are in a 3-bedroom apartment or if they move to a 1-bedroom apartment, they would be paying the same amount of rent, so they don't want to move. But I don't believe that DHCR had a program of downsizing according to your family makeup. Do we know? And would that help? Would that free up apartments for homeless families who need larger apartments?
Thank you. I don't have that answer right now. I don't know if others do here.
I was sorry, I was unmuted. I don't know. I was unmuted, I guess, to respond. So I apologize for interjecting. There's not necessarily a force. Some people do downsize on their own because they want to, pay less rent, or they just want to do the right thing. But there are people that have 2 bedrooms, and it's just one person, and maybe their dog has a room, to be honest. There's people with 3 bedrooms and it's one person in the house. There's also a lot of warehousing, and that's good that you brought that up, Rita. There's a lot of warehousing and public housing, a lot of vacant apartments, especially when we've done different door knocking and canvassing for different purposes. And I'm sure some people that was even running for election probably seen some empty apartments as well. So there's been a lot of warehousing. Also, one of the issues, and I brought it up to Stan Morris, who was working with Justice for All Coalition. He's not with them anymore, but he's going to be on the housing roundtable with the mayor. I asked him to bring up the point of the warehousing of apartments, and I also asked him to throw out a lot of resident council presidents have apartments as an office. And to me, with a homeless crisis in this city, that is just totally unacceptable. Why do you need an apartment when you have a room? You have a room, and then you have access to do meetings in the community centers if you have one. Why is it? What is the purpose of having an apartment? And it could be a 1 bedroom or studio, but that would help someone move out of a shelter. So the warehousing, the fact that resident councils are probably going to get mad, and it's not all, Holmes doesn't have it, but Isaac's does. So Holmes Towers president does not have an apartment, but Isaac Houses does. And it's not every development throughout the city, but there's a great amount. And that could be 100 to 200 families that could be out of shelters. So let's put a pin in that and see what we can do. I hope I answered some of what you all needed to know.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
And if there are no more hands, we'll now do our co-chair work on this side of things, compile this information. Greg, Ed, also, this could be something where we may just need to scare Nycha and send a FOIL out. Drafting a FOIL letter is a lot easier than it seems, quite honestly. But that's something as co-chairs we can put our heads together on and come back to the committee with for next meeting. Thank you, everyone. I know it's been a longer process having this discussion around public housing, but it's such a large and complex issue that moving forward so quickly doesn't seem right. One final hand on the topic, and then we'll move on to item 3, Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. I wanted to say it's a requirement of Nycha with regard to succession of apartments. Part of the problem has been people who need to be downsized want to stay in the building or the neighborhood, and the available units may be out of the neighborhood. So that's been one problem. The other issue is some of the apartments that are vacant is because they plan on renovating and they don't want to do Section 18 demolition. They want to renovate in place. So they're moving the residents out of their respective apartments into the empty apartments while they do the renovation in the respective buildings. The problem is most of Nycha's stock needs to be demolished, but there is no place to temporarily relocate people. And so that creates a problem. I've suggested that Nycha or federal government purchase a lot of these hotels and do a run at a time in a building. And that way they can relocate the residents in these hotels until they get the job done. And that's something that Jonathan Gouvet is trying to sort out and to see what can be done. But my concern at this point is how can our community board in good conscience negotiate or talk to Nycha after the death of Marilyn McNichol. I'm quite sure everybody's aware of who she is. She's from South Jamaica Houses. She, I think April 28th, she was found in her apartment after a year and a half. She had expired. There was a contractor, a roofer, and he happened to look into her window, which was open, and saw a skeletal body laying in bed. The police was notified. It turned out that she's been laying in that apartment for a year and a half. And because Nycha had been getting stimulus money from the government, they didn't bother to check who's paying rent, who's not paying rent because of loss of a job. They were just receiving the monies. Miss McMichael had 2 foster sisters, and they tried a year ago to make contact with her, and they couldn't get an answer. They went to the property management's office, and they were told that they could not speak to the 2 sisters because the emergency contact was Miss Michael's parents, and they had explained her parents had been expired for more than 20 years. So my concern is asset risk management. It's evident that if Nycha cannot maintain or know who owes what, they need to go into receivership. The federal government needs to shut them down and just take over and do the right thing, because you're going to keep spinning your wheels. Nycha's like a revolving door. People come in, they leave with suitcases full of money, and nothing is getting done. Nothing is getting done. The few good people that are left at Nycha, they're going to be transitioning out in 4 to 5 years. We have a lot of young people that come in and they're building their resume, and after 2 or 3 years, they move on to another authority. Nycha cannot be fixed at this point unless it goes into receivership. I spoke with the, well, they know how I feel. I spoke with the COO. He's been put in place by SDNY. I don't know if you're aware of that, because of the revolving doors of upper management. And I asked him specifically, who was he representing? Because I felt it was a conflict of interest. He said he's been put in place to represent the residents. So I asked him about Marilyn McMichael. And I said, Nycha has no soul. He said he felt the same thing, but he did an investigation. And this was the result. His folks told him that she had a fan on and the windows were open. And that's why no one smelled her body decomposing. I don't know if anybody on the call has medical experience or mortuary experience. There's no fan in the world that can eliminate a stench of a decomposed body. And that poor woman was laying in that bed for 2.5 years. When the sisters went for them to do a wellness check, they said because they weren't on the lease, weren't emergency contacts, they couldn't help. So they reached out to the police. So the police and the maintenance person went to the apartment. The maintenance person had a master key and couldn't gain entry. And so the police assured that they would check on her, which they didn't. And so this is how she was discovered. And the calendar showed the last day it was turned, it was April of 2020. The property manager stated that they hadn't collected rent for more than a year. So this is troubling for me, and I found out from some of the other resident leaders, this is not uncommon. A year and a half is uncommon, but there's been residents, especially during the pandemic, who have expired, that've been in their apartments for almost a month and no one knew. So this is just very, very troubling. And I would like to see some type of resolution from the community board that has some type of emergency system put in place whereby there are tags on the door that a lot of these seniors or a lot of these young, well, she was only 54. To me, she's a baby. But that these apartments have been checked, because you have a lot of seniors right now because of the pandemic who are afraid to leave their units because the variants are mutating. And there has to be something to protect the residents of Nycha, because Nycha's not doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm not afraid to admit ignorance. I was not aware of the story. So thank you for sharing that with us and everyone here. It's an
well, I will send you the link. I will put it in the chat box where everyone can look at the story.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Surely.
I posted the story. They sent me it, so if you want to view the article, it's in the chat now from Newsweek.
Yeah, if Mrs. Brown has other content to share, let's please put that in the chat. We did put in one article on this. I'm sure, I know that there are others, and this is obviously a tragic circumstance. And so I think we're seeking now, Rebecca, to pivot to item 3, which is like focus points for 2022. And we have some of the items already identified. And I think this would seem to me to be an ideal additional item for this committee to add to its focus points for the next number of months before the end of the year, which is, let's talk specifically about how it is that we can support, while we think about the work orders and work tickets, understanding that Nycha may not give accurate data, but working with residents, we might be able to seek that out. But now adding to that, how it is that we're supporting wellness checks for residents of Nycha, I think would be an item to add to our 2022 list of items to take on as a committee to think about. Obviously, that is a tragic circumstance, and the track record as someone who's worked in public housing developments, from my experience, it is not the first occasion that I have heard of a circumstance where someone has been lost and not discovered. And that is a tragic and horrific circumstance. And again, Rebecca, I think we can probably, as pivoting to item 3, I know we're going to kind of lay out the things we wanted to focus on for 2022. I think it would be great to add this item to that, which is to say, how do we ensure that the residents of Nycha, if there are repairs that need to be made, how is that going to happen? Understanding that the track record on that is terrible, but then let's add this item, which is critical, which is how do we know that people are well and cared for, and how it is that resources can get to those who need, so that this is something we do not hear about again. So, or we don't learn about it's happening again. Rebecca, I'll defer to you, but those are my quick reactions.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. So on our agenda for item 3 for new business, we have 3 questions to think about over the next month or so, also to discuss tonight, to add items to it, and to use the next month or so to prepare for, to hit the ground running. So the 3 questions we have are topics to start focusing on for September. Question 1, do we have an agreement on the committee's priorities? Public housing is one. As we just heard, we're going to discuss wellness checks for people living in public housing, our older neighbors. COVID laid bare how lonely people can be and how many people live in isolation, and it made it worse. So something as we reinvent the new normal, that's something we should really fold into our housing policy. Item 2, what topics are we missing? Wellness is one that we just added. Feel free to raise your hand, shout it out. If you're more comfortable thinking and emailing something over to us at a later date, that's perfectly fine too. And item 3, are there any specific steps that the committee is prepared to take, you want us to take, we should be taking. We've already discussed a couple of things specifically as they relate to public housing, things around foiling. We've discussed more affordable housing pushes in the larger aspect outside of public housing, but it's all interconnected. Housing's the number one need in our community. So these are topics for us to think about as we pivot to September and as we look to the future. And again, as we know, the mayor is going to be unveiling more housing platform more fully. It will be targeting neighborhoods like ours where we haven't seen much housing development because unfortunately some Nimbyism in the neighborhood that has fought that off. So if there are any hands, feel free to raise, want to share your ideas, your feedback. Zach dropped in the chat for everyone to see what I read out as well. Ed, Greg, feel free to jump in if there's anything I'm missing, anything to add.
And Zach, if you want to just plug in those priorities in the chat, I can resend that to you if you don't have it. That was the list set from 2022.
I mean, I was just thinking, do we want to
Thank
try
you.
And have something in September or October, with the mayor? And to Rita's point, we've been here, it's like, we're in this, we're just in the spot. In terms of with this mayor wanting to kind of move forward or build on what was, no pun intended, build on what was done the last mayor, with this ambitious plan that they're having, Dan Garodnick and these folks at city planning, do we want to try to have something in the fall, September or October, bringing in somebody from city planning to see how we can actually come up with something that we could push, some objectives, some goal, something that maybe it includes zoning with this? Because I think we always do talk about the fact that so much of zoning and development and housing is so intertwined, and maybe bring in the folks we didn't get to have tonight to present, and maybe if there is somebody from city planning to have a fuller discussion, and if there's some goal that maybe the mayor is pushing for that we could get behind or have some input on, or some way we could measure whether we're having any impact. I don't know. I just kind of thrown it out there. I don't know.
Yeah, if I could just build on that point, Ed, and then I see Mrs. Brown has her hand up. Let me just say this to the body as to build off what you said, Ed. I think that as a committee, the value of having reflected on, heard from experts, had discussion, to go from a place of, genuine frustration and, how do we sort through this? How do we figure this out? To kind of go from that place and to not seek out anyone who is going to give us an answer, but rather to look to city planning and others who could give us advice or insight as to how to best position ourselves. Because it seems to me at the end of the day, we are either going to be, I think we are either going to be dictated to, or we can make the choice to say there is a value in trying to figure something out. And by virtue of that, we think that we can be comfortable, or we can accept, or we can see value in these particular choices. Specific to our public housing residents, we want this. And specific to housing development, we believe we could be comfortable with this. And specific to whatever other items or issues, there's something about us coming to the table as a committee to our board and then pushing that beyond. Because one thing that seems very clear is that our mayor right now and his team are searching for certain answers. It is more often true than not that you are going to get told what's going to happen unless you're prepared to be able to say at the start, this is what we believe is right. Otherwise, you're being dictated to, and that could be problematic. And that's to take nothing away from our elected officials or, experts and other advocates. But the reality is we're in a position where I think the city is searching. I think we're acknowledging challenges. And now how do we move to a place where we come to the table? Again, Ed, to your point, city planning might be really helpful in giving us some strategies to think about this. But to be able to say, to start this process of saying to our elected officials on the city, Rita, as you said, state and other levels, to say, we as a community board believe that this is something we can adopt, understand, work with. This is something we're bringing to the table, as opposed to searching out some magic solution that I don't think anybody has. And the reason to get ahead of it is because otherwise you're going to be put in positions like some communities have been, where you're being told you're going to have to go through rezoning, and the city is going to dictate that process. And then you're reacting. And I think that again, I'm not suggesting any of this is easy. I'm not suggesting we as a community board are going to be able to come to a common understanding as to what we believe will work in the community. But from what I understand about places where action has taken place that has been favorable to a majority of the community board and the residents, it's come from community board members and others coming to the table and saying to elected officials and others, this is what we think makes sense. You fit us, as opposed to us trying to fit in with you. Sorry for freestyling there a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that was, I just want to build on your point, Ed.
No,
sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, and we'll kick it over to, to Mrs. Brown and to Rita, but I was going to say that was my thought on the piece, because anybody who knows me being on this board, you learn after a while, hitting your head against the wall on other issues that we all know east of the district. It's a lot easier. And again, it's that fine line that we as a group, it's a we, how do we not be lapdogs, for the administration, but having a dialogue and having some kind of a constructive input with that, I think is, because it seems easier, right? What was that I saw in City and State the other day? Clarence Norman said, if you're not on the inside, you're on the outside. And it's easier to get something. Anyway, I'll kick it over to Mrs. Brown and then to Rita for more input.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that recommending that the Housing Committee look up Doris Bunte, B-U-N-T-E, and receivership of the Boston Housing Authority. Doris Bunte was resident leader, and she and a Harvard student who was living in public housing, and another person, I see his face, but I can't think of his name. They were appointed by the mayor to serve on a board that reports to the mayor. And Doris Bunte wanted to keep public housing public. And so she and the other two board members were supportive of that. But the executive director of the Boston Housing Authority did not agree. His goals and plans were different from the resident board. So what Doris and her colleague did, they fired the executive director on television. And the mayor was very resentful of it. He had retaliated, but he retaliated against Doris Bunte. And he created a lot of trumped up charges, which were dropped. So as a result, she was reinstated, but she went to school, got her degree, and she ran for a state assembly and won the seat. And then 12 years later, Mayor Ray Flynn hired her back to be the executive director of Boston Housing Authority. But prior to that, when the mayor had created these trumped up charges, he lost interest in the Boston Housing Authority, and it decayed. There was trash everywhere. The common area, the pipes had swollen, they would burst, they weren't clean, there was trash everywhere. And so the residents went to court, and the judge, Judge Garrity, Paul Garrity, he expired last year, sidebar. He did a walkthrough the developments and looked at the apartments in the common area and said this was sinful. He took over receivership from the Boston Housing Authority and brought in a young fella, Harry Spence is his name, He was only 32 or 33. And he turned that place around along with Doris Bunting. And he did a lot of mixed use out in South Boston. And Doris was able to keep several units as public housing. And as a result, Boston Housing Authority is one of the better housing authorities in the United States because of receivership. Receivership is a good thing. It's hard on everybody, but it's a good thing. It brings people to the table. And all of those folks that are sitting up there on the 12th floor or whatever floor they're sitting at 90 Church Street, their perspective would be different. A lot of them would be gone. So I'm asking the Housing Committee to please research that. Please look at that model. And Sandy Enriquez was one of the executive directors at Boston Housing, and she was there during the receivership, and she can speak to it. And right now, she's the ED of Detroit Housing. But she was Sean Donovan's assistant secretary of HUD. And if you would like for her to speak with your committee at one of your meetings, I can reach out to her and ask her to do so. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the offer. Next, we have Rita.
Mrs. Brown just showed us that it can be done. And I'm asking everyone from the committee to give me your questions on affordable housing, on Section 8 affordable housing. And I will arrange a meeting, and those people, you know, more than three people can come, and we can get some clue as to where we should go to see if we can get investments in affordable housing. And I think what Mrs. Brown just asked for is very key to helping Nycha. So, good job, guys.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, Greg, Ed, do you have any final thoughts on the topic?
No, just great input from everybody. It's nice to see so many folks here, new faces, obviously familiar faces, just great. And I personally am looking forward to seeing every one of you in person. I know I said that at the bylaws meeting last night. And I'll continue to say it. Rita, I think I saw your hand up.
Go ahead, Rita.
One more thing, Dan Gorodnik is the person who took Stuyvesant Town through their machinations. I have no idea. Stuyvesant Town was built way before 1963, and why they weren't considered housing, looking for the name, not
public housing, not public.
Not public housing, like the
wasn't it built by
houses, instead of rent stabilized housing. What? Because that was the cutoff date, is December 31st, 1963. That's why many of the Section 8 housing didn't open until after 1963, because then they were rent stabilized. And so Dan Gorodnik would be perfect in his position that he's in now and where he came from.
He certainly knows the neighborhood. Let me just say a couple things just on the Dan Garodnick point. I've got some books here that are always there's some new books that are out specifically about zoning and zoning issues, but Dan is referenced in Other People's Money. This is a big book about the housing crisis and the greatest real estate deal that never made. Here it is. But anyway, there's two new books that are out right now about zoning issues. One called Arbitrary Lines, and Zachary will put that in the chat, and another one called Fixer Upper. Just a couple of books about housing and the choices that housing and the complexities related to housing and zoning issues. Zachary, you can plug those in the chat if you want. Books that are out right now, they're all 2022 books because zoning issues are coming up. They're hot topics related to zoning in general. And speaking of zoning, another thing to put in the chat, Zachary, if you have a minute, online, you can actually get the zoning handbook for the city of New York. I think we as a housing committee, it shouldn't just be our zoning committee that knows that. We in the housing committee need to be, knowledgeable on some level, but that stuff is all available online, and that's all posted in the chat. Zachary's putting that in there. I think based on this conversation, we've added wellness. How do we think about wellness checks for Nycha residents as a topic? I think it's definitely worthwhile to bring in Dan Garodnick at some point to talk to us on the planning side. That would be useful. I welcome a conversation about receivership. I think it'd just be a good conversation to have and to hear about, and how folks have thought about that. That's another topic. I just want to note too, I genuinely appreciated the feedback and conversation that the Manhattan Institute report prompted for us. And again, just by way of a notation on that we're not sharing that because because there's support for the Koch brothers on any strategy. That's not what this was. It's simply a matter of, when reports come out, whether they're favorable, unfavorable, comfortable or not comfortable with the content, I think it's really important for us to be educated and aware, because this is a city where those things do get read and folks do react to them. And I want us to be as prepared as possible as we set the tone, as we shape the conversation, and we put forward an agenda folks can react and respond to, so that we can dictate how it is that housing happens in this district. Because one thing we can't do is continue to close our eyes and think that it's acceptable that this is one of the community districts in the city that hasn't seen housing grow. And it's certainly not acceptable that any of our public housing residents are struggling or are not being taken care of where they live. So I think those are focus points for us. On that note, Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you, but I really wanted to express my appreciation for the conversation. Oh, and by the way, don't forget, Rita's asking for questions, so we can develop, co-chairs will come up with, feed us the questions. We can feed that to the individual Rita reference. And obviously we can also reach out to Marco. Marco had a lot of interesting follow-up items for the Manhattan Institute folks. I would have loved to have gotten those questions down on paper so we could get some follow-up. Marco, I see, jumped off, but we'll have to track him down to get his questions so we can get some clarification. Never hurts to ask people for clarity, because none of us are experts. That's why we work together, so we can learn as much as we can to figure out what our next steps are. Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, with that, if there's anything else, any new business, seeing no hands, I think we will adjourn. We'll call the meeting at 8:33 p.m. Everyone enjoy January. Stay cool. It's going to be a scorcher, and stay safe out there. We'll see everyone soon. Thanks so much for the feedback. And if there's any additional points, feel free to email them over, and including questions for Rita. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Great night.
Thank you, everybody.